You're listening to Switched On Australia, the podcast that tracks the opportunities and challenges of electrifying everything, everywhere. Switched On is brought to you by the publishers of Renew Economy, Australia's best informed, most read website focusing on the green energy transition, and is supported by Boundless Earth. Boundless Earth uses philanthropy, investment and direct advocacy to help Australia become a global force in a decarbonised world. Hello and welcome to Switched On Australia. I'm Anne Delaney. Now, Australia is preparing to build more renewable infrastructure in the next decade than it has in the previous three put together. But while we tend to picture transmission lines, turbines and solar arrays, there's a far more immediate question facing almost every regional town in the path of this construction boom. Where are all the workers going to live? Many regional housing markets are already stretched. You drop thousands of temporary workers into those communities without a plan, and you risk pricing out locals, straining services and deepening inequality. A new report out this week shows it doesn't have to be that way. With the right planning, renewable projects can actually boost regional housing, not burden it. From repurposed worker villages that become permanent neighbourhoods, to refurbished disused buildings and cleverly designed modular homes, communities around Australia are proving that construction phase housing can leave a positive legacy. Andrew Bray, National Director of RE Alliance, the independent not-for-profit behind the report, joins me to explore what's working, what's possible, and how good housing planning can reshape the energy transition for regional Australia. Andrew Bray, thanks very much for joining the Switched On podcast.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Anne.
Now, Andrew, tell me, you've done this report about housing and the renewable energy industry. How pressing are housing shortages in many of the regions that are sites for renewable energy developments?
Yeah, look, really pressing is a simple answer. We've been working for over a decade in regional communities all across the eastern seaboard and now also in Western Australia. And, every one of those communities, as you would expect, are concerned about housing. You can talk to people about renewable energy, but actually most of their day-to-day life is bound up in more immediate things, and there's a housing crisis all across the country, whether you're in the city or the country, but it's absolutely real in regional communities. And so anytime anyone in a regional community looks at a new development in their area, whether it's a renewable energy one or a mine or whatever it happens to be, one of the first things they'll think about is, well, where are we going to put all the workers for these? So it was something that we absolutely, every conversation that you have, it comes up. So it was something that we thought warranted further exploration.
And so what impact does the temporary housing for construction workers who are, potentially working on a renewable energy site, what impact is that having on the local community?
A lot depends on how well it's done. So there's sort of standard ways that's been done in the past, and people will be familiar with the idea of, a large workers camp, that might be a fair way out of town, and it's got all the facilities there for the workers, and it's within a safe driving distance of the project. That's another important factor. But those ones, will mean that sometimes the economic benefit of having all those people in town for the hospitality businesses, in particular, won't necessarily accrue to the town, and they sort of miss out on it. But nevertheless, the workers will still come into the pub on a Friday night, and there's sort of a whole social thing there. So those ones, sometimes that's going to be the best or the least worst outcome. But what we really tried to do with this report was look into some of the more innovative ways that companies have dealt with this and were able to address local concerns at the same time.
And we'll get into some of those innovative ways that they have dealt with it. But essentially, I presume that what's happening in a limited housing market in some of the regions, that that if the workers aren't living in the camps, they're going to be demanding or needing, I should say, existing rental housing, which I presume would just drive up the prices for locals as well.
Yeah, that's right. It's it is. There's no doubt that it's a challenge, and so that's the other option, is that if it's say a smaller project that's being built, you might be able to house the workers in local rental accommodation or hotels, but as you say, that drives up the prices of rents. But it also has impacts like, for instance, in one of the ones we look at, there's the domestic violence needs of that area. You need that sort of short-term, accessible accommodation available. So you need to be making sure that you absolutely are leaving those available. So there's a lot of pressure points there, and councils in particular, they're very, very wary of this. In general, they welcome new development because it keeps people in town, it keeps economic activity in the area. But the housing pressures that are universal across the country, they apply in places like Dubbo or Horsham or wherever it happens to be, and so they've got quite detailed plans around this and strategies for growing housing of particular sorts, and they're looking to the future and how they can be solving these things. So there's quite a lot of thinking has already gone into how to manage these issues, and so yeah, these examples are really sort of starting to dig into, well, how can we actually deliver on some of these aspects of the strategies?
And it is already being done, some of those, as you say, the innovative solutions. But firstly, can you quantify the scale of the expected housing demand from the renewable energy rollout? Have you been able to do that?
Yeah, we didn't do that specifically in this report, but if you look at the some of the REZs, the renewable energy zones in New South Wales in particular, they have done some of that work, and you've got sort of peak workforces numbers of say 5,000 workers, because there's there are a number of different projects that will be built as part of a REZ, and so if there will be a sort of peaks as these projects sort of come in and out. So part of the challenge there is sequencing, making sure that you're not trying to build all of the projects all at once.
Yes.
Making sure that you can, that peak is sort of kept at as low a level as you can possibly have it. Like, it's not going to be 5,000 beds all required all the time, but across a 5-year period, because that's the kind of period of the time frame that you're going to be working with for something like the Central West Uralla REZ. You can be keeping that down to, I don't know, to pulling a number out of the air here, but you might be able to keep it down to more like 3,000, and that's quite a material difference in the target that you're trying to hit.
So your report suggests that the renewable rollout in regional areas can actually have a beneficial effect for local communities and their housing problems and issues. Can we drill down into some of the specific areas that your report looks at? Let's go to the Central West Uralla REZ, the renewable energy zone in New South Wales. Wellington is part of that. What impact has the influx of renewable energy workers had on that area, and how has the community addressed the problem?
Yeah, so Wellington, to look at the context of that area, it's got a very tight rental market, as you could imagine. It's also got a statistically much higher number of First Nations people living there. It's about 15%. So it's got a few particular things around the profile of it there. But the example we've looked at there was an aged care centre, which was around 35 beds, that had been closed in 2018, and it was essentially looking for a bit of love and attention. But there's a wind farm project being built near there, and the developer of that project saw that they had a need for workforce accommodation. There was this building which was still, it was still in reasonable shape, but it just needed a lot of upgrading. And so they were able to, step in, do those upgrades. They hired a First Nations head contractor who, knew the community around there, and were able to use that as a driver for First Nations employment as well. And so they've, 35 beds is only part of what they would need for their accommodation needs. But nevertheless, that building is now going to be available, post the construction of that project for, other projects or, for other uses in the town. So that's actually a sort of net benefit for that area.
Will the council then take charge of that particular building, or who owns it?
I believe the council owns it. I'm not 100% sure of that, but it's being leased by the by the proponent there. So they will lease it for the 5-year period that they need it, and then after that it'll return to other users in the area. So whether it's privately owned or owned by the council, or it will be available in some form or another, and in much better shape than it was before.
Yes, because you'd certainly want there to be a lasting impact for the local community, wouldn't you? After the refurbishment of a obviously a perfectly good building.
Yeah, that's right, and it's quite a nice building. I was part of an event there
You'd
a
like
few
to
years ago.
get old in that building, would you?
Well, yeah, I mean, obviously it's been upgraded to a sort of accommodation level, right? Not just sort of a nursing
Not
home.
aged
Yeah,
care.
that's right.
Yeah.
But it could absolutely return to aged care if that was what the community in that area needed, and that kind of comes back to one of the key features or common features across these case studies is that it's sort of listening to what the community needs. And so in this case, there was a perfectly good building which just needed some good upkeep and repair. Like, it's been there for quite a long time, that building, so it is part of that Wellington community. So they now have that community asset essentially available into the long term now.
I was wondering how available are some of these large disused buildings in regional towns? Is a model like this scalable for other towns?
Absolutely. I mean, to step back for a second, if you're developing any large project and you need a large number of short-term accommodations, the other option, the work camp option we were talking about before, you might spend, if you're a proponent, you might spend $20 million, putting together this camp away from town.
20 million? That really?
Well, when you look at the operation of it, you've got to put in, you might have to put in services, so electricity, water, sewerage, that kind of thing, just on a temporary basis. Then you put up your dongers or whatever it happens to be, and then you run it for a couple of years. It's quite an expensive undertaking, and then you pull it all down and, it's gone. So it's no use to anyone. Yeah, so there's a real, opportunity there to be thinking about that more wisely and more in a way that's actually delivering something for the place in which you're building your project.
Which sounds like what they're trying to do up in North Queensland, where I believe a clean energy and infrastructure company has teamed up with a workforce accommodation developer, one of these developers who spent potentially $20 million on temporary accommodation. Tell me what's happening there in Rockhampton and Gracemere.
Still in the sort of early stages there, but they're essentially looking to, again, on the back of plans to build a large renewable energy projects, they're looking to build more permanent housing. As you say, the developer has joined up with a property developer. Their core business is both developing housing and developing renewable energy projects. So that's that's quite a dramatic sort of change in the way a renewable energy developer might look at what their business is. Again, it delivers on the sort of things that that community would like to see, which is an increase in housing over the longer term, but also means that there's good accommodation there for for the people who are staying there. And it means if that housing is then closer to town, and the people who, you might move up there for, say, 18 months and live in that area. And if you're close to the town, you might join the footy club. You might be part of other things in the town. You would start looking at those places as quite viable places to move a family to, and that's exactly the sort of things that regional Australia really wants to be developing.
And it's not an insignificant project, is it? Because I think they're planning on 305 beds in Gracemere and 648 in Rockhampton. This area has historically experienced a lot of boom-bust cycles driven by its dependence on mining employment. So they've obviously had a lot of temporary accommodation coming and going. I presume it's trying to avoid that boom-bust housing cycles that have been experienced.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right, because those homes, in a place like Rockhampton, where and in that region, there are a number of renewable energy projects planned. Obviously, they have other sort of mining ones there as well. That housing becomes available for project, sort of medium-term project-based things, but then, longer term as housing for just families to live in and just local residents. So the councils up there, they've seen the booms and the busts, and they've seen industries come in and really treat the local community as a bit of a commodity. And so they, those councils were on the front foot saying, well, look, we'd like to see it done better this time. And so that particular example is one that, really tries to answer that call from the council and says, we actually want to leave the places in better shape than we found it. So very positive on that one.
Very positive. There is a difference, though, in investing in well-designed, comfortable, long-term housing and short-term worker accommodation, isn't there? I mean, what is the incentive for renewable developers to go the extra mile and invest in something in legacy housing, I think, as you've called it in the report?
Mm. Yeah, well, there's sort of two parts to that, and I think the first one is really, if you've got workers that are housed in comfortable environments, then they're going to be happier workers. They're going to be
Your workers, yes.
That's right, and you need, if you're asking people to, in many cases, move quite a way to do those those jobs, then that's an important sort of HR benefit that you deliver. But also, it does mean that you have that connection to the town. Then, if your workers are living in proximity to the town, they are joining clubs, they are making connections. I know I don't generally like to talk about social license as a concept, but I think if you have people who are building your projects who have become part of the community there, then that social understanding and those networks that build are a really important part of connecting your project to that community. That's something that I think a number of companies sort of aspire to, and I've heard many of them talk about it for quite a while, but we really wanted to take some of these examples where companies are going the extra mile, and say, look, this is how you could actually be helping your social license by generally contributing to the communities you're building in.
Do we know what the cost difference would be between a high quality legacy focused modular build and a standard temporary workers camp unit? I mean, you did say that the temporary builds camps sometimes can be around $20 million. You could build a lot of modular homes for $20 million, maybe not as many, but do we know the difference?
Yeah, we didn't really get down into that level of detail in this discussion, but I mean, I expect there are efficiencies. For instance, that the example we were talking about before of the existing building in Wellington, there are 35 beds that you don't need to start from scratch on. So there's going to be efficiencies in delivering it that way. I mean, in that Queensland example that we're talking about here, it means that you then have housing that becomes available in the real estate market. So you're looking at sort of selling into different markets, I guess. You're not just providing short-term accommodation, you're generating long-term housing supply, and that's a valuable asset. So if you're looking at it in those terms, as these two companies are doing, then you're looking at something that's potentially financially viable as well.
The building of temporary workers' accommodation is more established in Queensland, in that central northern Queensland area, because of the history of mining. How does that history, do you think, impact on what can now be done for worker accommodation in Queensland?
Yeah, I mean, I think, if anyone's sort of done a rinse and repeat sort of trials and developments, then Queensland's a place. I mean, Western Australia is the same. It's obviously got a similar sort of history. These kind of companies will be some of the ones that renewable energy companies are contracting as well. But what we're highlighting here is the ones where it's sort of responding to local concerns and local plans and that kind of thing. So if you're able to do that in a way that's going to generate some long-term benefits, then that's really preferable.
Let's pop down to Victoria, down to Mortlake, which is a town, I believe, in the Wimmera southwest region of Victoria, where the Dundonnell wind farm, they've funded increased emergency housing for women and children who are escaping family violence. Tell me how that project came about.
Yeah, that was an interesting one in that the proponent down there, as they were planning their community benefit scheme, again, the thing that many companies talk about, but not all of them do, which is really listen to what the local concerns were, and they consulted, quite widely in that town of Mortlake. And this was the example I referred to before, is that, one of the key things, as they had a few renewable energy projects built around there, so they had some workforce accommodation pressures over those years, and had discovered that some of that short-term emergency housing was being taken up by worker accommodation, which is obviously not what you wanted. And so the domestic violence emergency shelters needed some extra capacity. One of the good things here is that obviously they were speaking to groups quite widely throughout the community. It wasn't just the loudest voices that you might hear at the council meetings or whatever. It was that all the different parts of the fabric of that town, and they said, look, what we really need is some available emergency accommodation that's not where we are, because that's the terrible situation with domestic violence, is that the women and children escaping those situations need to be able to go somewhere else where they're away from danger. And so, as part of their community benefit scheme, they have made available some regular accommodation in Melbourne for those organisations to draw on as they need it.
What is so interesting about this example is that I'm absolutely positive it could only come about because of wide consultation, as you mentioned, because if you just go and talk to the local sports group or whatever, you're not necessarily going to come up with a project like that.
Yeah, that's right. And again, people living in these towns, they're not they've got a wide range of interests, and the parts of that town that make it tick are really quite wide and diverse, and their interests are quite similar to anyone in the cities or towns. It's healthcare, it's childcare, it's aged care, it's looking after each other. Sporting clubs are obviously a part of that, but it's a little bit of a as people say, no more sporting jumpers. Sporting jumpers are great, and I played in a couple of funded sporting jumpers myself, and I'm glad we're doing that. But if you really want to be talking to people in the places that the projects are, and and delivering community benefits that are meaningful to them, they're the sort of things that you need to be stepping into. So that was, quite a good example to be able to highlight there.
Let's go to the northern tablelands of New South Wales, to Uralla, where there's, I understand, around about 5 gigawatts of potential energy projects in the pipeline, enough to power over 2 million homes, your report says, along with the grid infrastructure that will come along with that as well. So clearly the workforce during construction is going to put huge pressure on housing supply in that area. Tell me how the local Uralla Council has responded to the challenge.
Yeah, one of the good things that's happened in New South Wales is as part of the renewable energy zone rollout. Energy Co has contributed money to some of the key councils in those areas to help them essentially put on more, planning and engagement staff to help the councils get across the what it will mean for them to be in a renewable energy zone. So in Uralla, there have been a couple of new roles created there in the planning section, planning and infrastructure section, to help them get across those issues, all the different things, roads, planning permits, but also housing. For a local government area like Uralla, it's a reasonably sort of popular tourist area up there. It's a beautiful part of the world, as I'm sure you know. But the rental market's incredibly tight. It's similar to other places in that way. So they put together a local housing strategy, which looks at all the different needs they were going to have across the projects that are coming and will be built there, but also, teases out the different ways in which developers can be contributing to long-term housing supply through the short-term needs of specific projects.
Uralla Council couldn't be very big though, Andrew, with only 6,000 residents and even less ratepayers. How are they managing the skills and finances that they're going to need to drive or to in some way direct the accommodation that's going to be needed?
Yeah, well, that's where this extra staffing is quite valuable. And so they'll have people there available to work with the developers to be making some of this. But I guess one point to be made, a broader point around these case studies is that, we're talking here about particular opportunities for local areas to benefit from these projects. But, housing is just a massive challenge, and it really does require, whole of government work here. Like, these case studies are good, and they absolutely demonstrate better ways for proponents to be building accommodation and working with their communities. But at the same time, government needs, at both state and federal level, needs to be doing much more about housing, and that's something you see on the front pages of the paper most days of the week because it is so big. This is not going to solve all of Uralla's housing problems. In the scheme of things, it's a small part of a much bigger national project that we really need to be succeeding in.
But what these examples are showing are ways for local communities to plug into that bigger process, which, clearly, when we hear about the housing needs of the country, it can feel incredibly overwhelming. But for local communities to be able to plug into some of these processes, I think is what you're trying to identify in this report.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, so they lay out the sort of, with the knowledge of the region that they have, like they know the specific lots and areas where they'd like to see new housing built. In one of the other case studies, which we may get to, there was a specific lot out of town, which was, on the outskirts of town that they were hoping, the council was hoping to be developed. And they were able to, work with the proponent on getting the DA, the development application up, to rezone that lot so that it could turn into long-term accommodation.
This is Dubbo, isn't it, that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, it's a planned housing estate on the outskirts of Dubbo. That project means that there'll be a whole section of potential housing area, so it's a number of hectares, which will have sewers, water, and electricity all out to those blocks, and that will be paid for as part of the worker accommodation that the proponent needs. But it'll be left behind there for the council to then let out and for real estate development.
So, just a few general questions, Andrew. Do any of these case studies offer an effective, scalable model that can be rolled out, or I think what I'm hearing you really say is that it very much has to be place based. It's got to be a much more organic process for the community to be involved very early and have their voices heard.
I think if anything, the replicable part is the process. It is that early listening. It's really working very closely with the council and making sure that the planning that they've already done is folded into the thinking for your project. So in that sense, it's not a cookie cutter, but there are a number of different variations of it that are presented in these case studies. I mean, I think in a case of some of those companies, they are now looking for other opportunities in different places which look like the ones that they've already done in, say, Dubbo. So, for a company to work out, this is a way that we can actually do our workforce accommodation that delivers value for the community. If they put that in front of council in a different state, you're already a number of steps along the way, because the council can look at that and say, well, yeah, actually, that's going to work for us. We might nip and tuck it in this way to make it suitable to what we need here. But now we're having a really productive conversation, and it's pretty early on in our discussion.
It seems the role of local government in all of this seems to be absolutely crucial to me.
Yeah. Those local plans that they develop are the sort of things that councils are engaging on, every year, and they are always looking long term, because they know that they're the ones who are going to be on the hook for running the shire or municipality or whatever it happens to be for years to come. So it's in their interest to make sure that things are done in a way that's sustainable and financially sustainable as well. Look, I think in some cases, communities sometimes have a slightly difficult relationship with their councils. Not all communities feel like the council is working for them, but at the same time, councils are the ones who are responsible for this. We try to make sure when we're working in areas that that community is fully represented in the plans that the council are working on. We're in a democracy. We do this group decision making in the best way that we can.
Yes. Do you think we need any regulatory changes to try and expedite the delivery of some of this longer term housing, not just the temporary workers accommodation?
I think you could definitely see a bigger role for government in it. Whether it's through regulation, I'm not sure. Given the sort of communities, that organic community approach, ground up approach to this, sometimes regulation can actually sort of be a barrier there. It's good to be able to set some targets around these things. To go back to New South Wales again, I know that Energy Co. and the rollout of the energy roadmap in New South Wales across the REZs, the renewable energy zones, now has to have more of a whole of government approach. So there's much better cooperation with, say, the transport department on roads, with the housing department on housing. I think there's definitely a role for state government to be in there and using their muscle and their finances to be able to develop some of this and do it in a way that's cognizant of bigger challenges rather than just the challenges of getting a particular project built.
Just a final question, Andrew. If you were speaking to a major renewable energy CEO who's skeptical about the business case for investing in long-term housing in some of the
renewable energy zones and places where we're building some of this infrastructure, what would be your most compelling argument?
Mm. Oh, look, I think I try to make it pithy, I guess, but there are definitely two sides to this coin, and one is that there are real opportunities for any proponent to be building their project in a way that delivers benefits for communities. And we've just been talking about housing here, but obviously, community benefit funds, upgrading sort of key roads and road access around the area. All of those things are ways in which communities can make themselves a more responsible part of the community, and one that the community will welcome. But on the flip side, if you don't do this stuff, you will not be welcomed into town.
Yeah.
And that has a real material cost of development. And we can see it when engagement is not done well. It can get people's backs up, and they'll dig in against projects, and that's absolutely slowing down the energy transition. So that's the choice that I think industry is facing. And as far as where our role in mediating this discussion, I guess it's really just to say, look, here are some of the ways that you really can do a lot better, and we really encourage proponents to be taking up some of the ideas that are presented in these case studies.
Andrew Bray, thank you so much for joining the Switched On podcast today.
Yeah, thank you, Anne.
And Andrew Bray is the National Director of RE Alliance. You can find RE Alliance's new housing report, along with those case studies of communities turning temporary worker accommodation into long-term assets, on the RE Alliance website. Thanks for listening to Switched On Australia. I'm Anne Delaney. See you next time.